Colleagues, welcome to the Neuroinclusive Classroom, Microlink's education offer for 2025-26. We've done the introductions, but this gives you a little overview of what we expect to cover today. I'm going to give you some chilling statistics, absolutely in black and white. This is our starting point in the English education system. We need to talk about pressures on young people today. We need also to talk about the pressures on schools, leaders, and teachers today. And then we'll give you our response to this. We call it a unifying but not uniform solution, creating a neuro-inclusive classroom. Then we'll spend a bit of time describing our offer, and part of that offer is an explanation of digital remediation. That's why Neil's here, and we hope that's informative. So that's where we are. We've gone through the introductions. Let's move straight to some of the backdrop to what we do. Let's start off by saying that there are many successful children in our system. But I've spent my life, if you like, in education, working with those marginalized, those disadvantaged, or those young people who might not be registering on all of the stats that we see. Let's start off with absence rates. These are the headline figures for the last year where we've had a full amount of information. Now you might think, well, you know what? The overall absence rate of 6.83% isn't that bad. But of that, let's go deeper into the figures. Let's go deeper and look at what's called persistent absence and severe absence. Based on the number of children on roll, what does it mean? It actually means that we have 1.6 million children who are persistently absent from school and 185,000 children who are severely absent. And of these children, 2/3 are in school with EHCPs or an SEN support. 2/3. And what these figures don't show is an estimated 300,000 children who are not on roll in any school. And again, I'll be sending you the links to these supportive data so you can interrogate it for yourself. I find these figures utterly remarkable. For the last year of full data, there were 955,000 suspensions. Now, if you divide that by the number of days in the school year, which is about 190, yeah, it works out to 5,000 suspensions a day, the highest ever on record. 2023, 2024. And if we interrogate the data again, we see that SEN support and EHCP young people are grossly represented in the statistics. For the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of work with youth justice teams across the country. And the collision between young people with special educational needs and ending up in youth justice pathways is just too great to ignore. Official statistics say 80%. But we know that the first time significant special needs are picked up about some young people is on entry to a youth justice pathway. So Colleagues have done a deep analysis on this, like at Milton Keynes. They suggest the figure is over 90% when you base it on a speech, language, and communication diagnostic assessment. Well worth following these links to find out more when you get the email. And another colleague, Dr. Alex Chard, has done a deep dive into 80 young people in the criminal justice system across the Unity Authority of the West Midlands. He did a deep dive into the background of these young people. Now, when you look at those statistics, the collisions of complex needs surrounding these young people who have ended up into youth justice pathways is just, again, too great to ignore. Only one child out of the 80 had no recorded abuse or childhood adversity. Now, these are official statistics, but my colleague, Dr. Nicole Ponsford, has gone into the data and looked at the authentic voice of the child. I'm not going to say any more. I'm now going to hand over to Nick in a pre-recorded recording. Hope you hear it, and here it goes.
So my name's Dr. Nicole Ponsford, and I'm the founding CEO of the GEC, as well as being the co-head of education at Microlink, which means I get to, I get to straddle lots of areas when we're thinking about being underserved. And this data comes from our first report at the GEC, where we've surveyed 26,000 voices in education of staff and students. And our work uses a new form of data for inclusion, which is called kaleidoscopic data. And in this, it is a new third level of data beyond the static data that are used in MIS systems or DFE data collection. This is based on the Equality Act and on the lived experiences. And it highlights in particular our marginalised and disadvantaged voices, both in the staff room and in the classrooms. And I think it's been really interesting what you've been saying so far, Marius, looking at the data around suspensions, looking at
I'll start it
in
again.
terms of attendance. And I will talk to this in just a moment, but I was just having a little look at the report that we'd created, the 26,000 voices, and over a quarter of our students that identified as neurodivergent or as having a disability say that they've missed school due to feeling unsafe in school. And I think this is really where we start to see the terminology around the new Ofsted framework, which is, in their words, achieve, belong and thrive. I think that we actually need to be thinking around, is that belonging needs to be done first to unlock the potential so our young people can achieve and then go on to thrive. So just to talk to some of this data as well. So we ask our young people, they self-identify, they have anonymous surveys. There's been an awful lot of work, 5 universities, 50 student councils creating these surveys. So the young people feel that they can have a voice, which means we really do collect unique data. School leaders get this in their own context, but after a year of doing this, we wanted to put out our national information, which is where this comes from. So some of the things we learned is that, you know, 30% of SEND learners strongly disagreed that teachers listen to their perspective. And this compared with, as you can see, a huge cavern of 8.7 of non-SEND students. And that isn't just disagree, that's strongly disagree. They were very acute in the fact that they felt that their voices were not listened to, acknowledged, or even sought in a lot. And when we look at the Ofsted frameworks, gathering people voice is one of the key elements that's new, that qualitative data, the data for storytelling, which needs to be there. A fifth of students with identities who identify that strongly disagree that their needs are supported. And I think this is really important because where our young people might be on waiting lists for CAMS or for neurodivergent testing, for example, for a medical diagnosis, that, you know, the young people maybe already be getting that provision in school. We know great schools and trusts that are creating really inclusive environments for our young people whilst they wait years for identification. And those young people are saying that their needs aren't supported. What did come up interestingly in this, Marius, as well, when we looked at the qualitative data and the storytelling, the young people were asking for assistive technologies, and when they had it, they had an increased sense of belonging in the classroom when they were able to use it.
Well, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
sort of where they are heard and where they have confidence that they're being heard, they will access the technology that will help them.
Well, that's it, and it helps them with that communication in a way that we've seen on our programs with Microlink on Be That Teacher and Be That TA, where young people have been sort of dismissed that they can't read, maybe they're dyslexic, and once they use assistive technology, you know, the teaching staff will say, oh, look, they can read, you know, and as I always say, we just haven't given them the right things. So it's imperative, I think, that we are asking our marginalised young people how they feel, what can we do to serve them better.
As you can hear, sort of, Nick has a lot to say about this, and when we carve up this video, we will give that full presentation from Nick for you to hear. The authentic voice of the child is not strong and supportive of what we do when you look at those marginalized groups. We'll come back to that pressure of being that invisible disability puts on children. We'll explore that in a minute. Now, the pressures on young children today, I think we are clear. They are legion, aren't they? There's some of them presented for you to consider. And wow, social media and online life is a massive pressure on young people. But let's not dismiss academic pressure, their awareness within families and society of the cost of living crisis and the impact of poverty, family instability, bullying and abuse, discrimination and marginalisation, loneliness and social isolation, which seems to be a hangover from the pandemic, and of course, concerns about the future. We'll come to hidden disability in a minute, but also young people who've suffered from those multiple adverse childhood experiences. Horaces, the stats for children who have 4 aces in their hand or higher are not good at all. And rising mental health difficulties. Again, we're going to explore this now with Nick, the mental health of our young people today. So, Nick, I'd love your opinion now on this whole factor about this collision, if you like, between well-being and mental health. How poor levels of well-being can bring down your social and emotional, if you like, levels to the point it becomes a mental health issue. Amazing statistics here, eh, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've got to a point where we're starting to question, you know, what these words mean. I know there's been a lot in the press about young people being anxious. And for me, that's always intersectional when I start to think about our neural minorities, for example. So I think we've got to be really careful with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we lead on to that, the pressure that young people feel who may be, and let's use the word here, neurodivergent. For example, the British Dyslexia Association reckons that over 70% of learners with dyslexia go unnoticed in schools. And I've thought long and hard about this diagram, and I love your thought about this, Nick, because we often talk about a spectrum of needs, don't we, and a threshold of detection somewhere on that continuum, where on one side, society says you haven't got a need, you might be neurodivergent, but on the other side, you have a need. And actually, if you look at the way I've done this, there is an overlap, a grey area. There's no smooth transition. There's no cut-off point. And what about the young people trapped at that cut-off point, Nick?
Yeah, and there's a bit of me, it really angers me, because part of this, I wondered if we started to track the amount of teachers, who understand this. You know, that 70% of learners, what percentage of our teaching staff or our curriculum staff or our ecosystems are grown-ups are unable to notice this, which means we're not unlocking those possibilities as well. So, and I think we're in a tight spot, aren't we, with sitting with health and social care with this, against a backdrop of social media awareness of neurodiversity, and schools are kind of caught in the middle. And I think for this, sometimes we don't necessarily need to unlock a diagnosis. You know, it's one of the lived experiences where you have to pay or wait to find out who you are, unlike race and ethnicity, for example. But it's something that I think, you know, that pressure of waiting or not being seen or not understanding yourself and the way, you know, your mind is working or you're communicating.
Absolutely. Not understanding yourself. I mean, so many young people have spiky profiles. They might be weak in a certain area, such as reading, but by goodness, they're good at creating, reasoning, you know, pattern solving. And many of these young people don't realize they might be neurodivergent themselves. Some of the young people learn to mask their neurodivergence very successfully, but of course, the pressure that they puts on them as individuals does lead to meltdown. Parents talk about the Coke bottle effect, don't they, Nick?
Yes, the Coke bottle effect. So essentially, if you imagine every time someone does something that irks, annoys, or angers you, it's like shaking up a bottle of Coke. That lid will come off, and so part of it, we do see schools that might do brain breaks, sensory breaks, work out ways that essentially, you know, a young person or even a member of staff can regulate as they go through the day.
Totally.
It's alongside the mental illness, is that masking creates that cup effect, which then overspills outside. So sometimes the masking will happen that the students seem absolutely fine. They may be overly academic, for example, or the milestones might be different in terms of their communications, but it can really fall at home in the home environment, and that can also lead to real issues with parental engagement too.
Oh, totally. Thank you. The pressure of invisible disability. Now let's turn to schools, leaders, and teachers today. The new Ofsted framework. For many campaigners in the area of inclusion, they are delighted. But both Nick and I have run sort of commentary on this. Nick, through her inclusion focus, has done webinars about the new framework. I asked the question, can you inspect inclusion into a school? And it's all based on this new fundamental principle that drives the Ofsted toolkit. They will ask the question, do children achieve? Do children have a sense of belonging? And thus, do all children, not just a few, but all children thrive? What a challenge. What a challenge for leadership teams and teachers. Apart from a relentless focus on behavior and attendance, progress and attainment, apart from the severe budgetary restrictions that every school is under, apart from a new Ofsted focus on inclusion, and hey, data drop, this is Nick talking. How do you know what children on the margins think and feel? You now have the added complication, challenge, if you like, of integrating artificial intelligence into the way you work and children learn. And as Ofsted said, the biggest danger is to do nothing. Oh dear. Okay. Nick and myself and other colleagues have processed all of this. What's gone into the melting pot, you might ask? Well, there's my experience, and I have been privileged not only to teach and lead in many challenging schools. Before I went into teaching, I did 6 years of brain sciences and research work. Um, that's quite an interesting combination. Nick as herself as well has an amazing collision of interests. It's very rare. You get someone who really knows about data, about technology, but also inclusive practice. But let's also acknowledge our luck, and I will call it luck, to work for Microlink. Microlink has delivered workplace adjustments for any individual who might have long-term health conditions, might have neurodivergent conditions, or even is recovering from illness, or you might have an accident or something like that. But for 30 years, they're focused on workplace solutions with over 500,000 individuals who have benefited from it. We've put it all into the melting pot and we have come up with a unifying but uniform solution. And we call it creating a neuro-inclusive classroom. Now, I've got a short video to play you. Here it goes. This is our short 3.5 minute promotional video for being in a neuro-inclusive.
In every school and every classroom, there are countless worlds and stories shaped and sculpted in special ways by the extraordinary minds of children. At Microlink Education, we believe it is our responsibility to help schools make the classroom a vibrant and engaging environment in which every young mind can flourish. Our understanding of how children think and feel and experience the world is constantly growing and changing. Neuroscience tells us that every child is wired differently and that their different backgrounds, environments, and life experiences influence their development. And yet, our classrooms remain largely unchanged. So Microlink wants to help you build a new classroom, one fit for our modern times. We call it the Neuroinclusive Classroom. It's one where children can reach for assistive technologies in the same way they would reach for a pencil and paper. Where teachers and teaching assistants openly embrace existing and emerging technologies. Where AI isn't feared but used to unlock learning and progress, transform administrative workloads, and elevate individual support. It's a classroom where an emotionally intelligent and empathetic teaching workforce understand anxiety and childhood trauma. Where difference is understood and celebrated, and children are encouraged to be their authentic selves, surrounded by a sense of belonging and support. It's a classroom where teachers build positive relationships with every child, relationships that build resilience, self-efficacy, and lifelong success. Microlink Education, home of the Neuro-Inclusive Classroom.
Okay, that's the gloss, if you like. That's the gloss. Let's deconstruct it. What does this whole concept of the neuro-inclusive classroom mean? Microlink are specialists in assistive technologies, and we won 2 DFE-funded contracts to introduce existing and emerging assistive technologies into mainstream classrooms, not just for individual young people, but so that a young person can reach for an assistive technology in the same way they would reach for a pen and pencil to support. We're also going to support schools, of course, on the AI journey. We want to adopt what's called the principles of universal design and embrace the social model of disability. What does that mean? It means it's incumbent on society to make the adjustments, not the child. And so, if you like, the environment in which the child is learning is the enabling environment. We want to support adaptive teaching. We know there's some incredibly good practice going on, but adaptive teaching plus AT can be used as a gateway to IA. We're not advocating here throw everything out. We're talking about evolution, not revolution. We want to transform the role of teaching assistants from one of help and support to one of empowerment, supporting young people to learn independently, maybe through the use of assistive technology. This is an odd one, you might think. Why should we be concerned with addressing the culture and climate of a classroom? Well, we call it social and emotional accessibility, and extending that concept of physical accessibility beyond lifts. We want teachers to understand the neuroscience behind it all, and eventually, of course, open up those pathways to the more expansive use of AI. Now, what do we mean by this? I put this out on social media a week ago, and it caused a few laughs. I said here, we're not trying to make teachers brain scientists, but actually, hang on, yes, we are. But this is absolutely fundamental to our belief. We believe that a basic understanding of how the brain works is foundational to becoming an effective educator. After all, you cannot become an expert in race tuning a car engine without understanding how the engine works. This is what we fundamentally believe. We want to go Maslow on this, right? We want to go Maslow. Self-actualization. In other words, a child choosing to use an assistive technology freely and with confidence because their self-esteem is supported by considering a school's social and emotional accessibility. What's the block? Well, we've seen some schools where a solution is offered to a child, such as a pair of wearable specs which correct their dyslexia. Yes, it exists. It's called LexiLens. But the child says, no, it doesn't work. The reason why that child says, no, it doesn't work is because they might feel marginalized by the use of it. They might feel they could be ridiculed. They might feel that people might question why they're being treated differently in the classroom, which is why we are concentrating on that sense of belonging that could empower the use of technologies that might help. This is why we're going deep into this. So into the final bit of our presentation today, we are going to describe our offer. Be that teacher with a capital A and a capital T for assistive technology. This is an outgrowth from the DFE programs we ran. What's new in AI and AT? Some consultancy training and opportunities that we'll offer, but also something we call Microlink MicroLearning. So back to Nick now, who leads our programs on Be That Teacher and Be That Teacher. So Nick, back to you now. You are the course leader for Be That Teacher and Be That Teaching Assistant. And I love the AT in that being capital letters for a good reason. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much. So our program that we've been running for several years now comes out of the DFE funded pilot and program, but there was so much interest, we've carried it on. So we've got two offers. We've got Be That Teacher, which helps you look at where you're at with the use of assistive technology and AI as an organisation. And then we've also brought in our more individual Be That TA. But what we've had unexpectedly are schools and trusts signing up for both of those offers so that they can do a pincer movement and really understand this across the whole of the ecosystem, which is fantastic. And what we see term on term with our 3 live coaching sessions and all our online support, wraparound care and resources for it, is an immediate effect, not just in the awareness of the participants, but actually the joy and the unlocked potential of learning that happens as a result of bringing assistive technologies and AI into our schools and trust. So it is fantastic. We have wonderful cohorts that learn with and from one another as well, in quite a unique way, I think, of supporting schools with assistive technology.
I think so, because we've adopted a coaching approach over 3 months, haven't we? So we don't just say, here's the 2R PowerPoint, go for it. That simply doesn't work anymore. But we coach in groups, and there's quite a lot of interaction in those groups, aren't there, Nick?
Yeah, there are examples of being really honest about where you're at. And we know life and inspections can get in the way of any plan, but this is, the real people working together and understanding and learning from one another. And then once we start to put that into play, there's a sharing of best practice and case studies and a real celebration of what you're able to achieve with it. And we have people coming back, don't we, that they've done 1 year and they want to come back. So you can be at any kind of experience level and use our audit tools and, be upskilled in the latest AI or assistive technology that are being used. And there's an extended offer because obviously working with Microlink, there are monthly webinars, there's a whole research bank, we've got an AT expert that also can support with surgery. So it really is a bumper pack, isn't it, Marius?
Oh, it's fantastic, and having an expert on call should you need it is so powerful. Yes, schools in our tent will get access to so many of the emerging technologies that are happening. But as you can see, we have a string of monthly webinars where we focus on either individual apps, which are disruptors, which will aid the journey towards inclusive practice hugely. We're looking forward to running some of those. We are also, Nick, aren't we, looking at AI in education? Not necessarily the stuff you might get from government, but the stuff that might be missing. And that's why we call our webinars, and in the spring we're going to be doing this, Missing Pieces. Now, you have a background in media and media education, Nick. Could you say something about that critical need for AI media literacy today?
Yes, I would love to. So I think the last decade or so, we've been thinking about digital literacy, which has been really sort of added on to computer science and the curriculum there. We are now starting to bring in an AI literacy. What's been kind of lost as an media studies advanced skills teacher and examiner has been the media literacy, and I've been involved recently with my work with Bournemouth University with work that Ofcom are doing in terms of looking at media literacy communities of practice from the business and the corporate side, but also for a real push to the government to focus on teacher training, which I think will be coming in. And media literacy brings in all that digitalisation, but it also helps understand content creation and what social media is doing, and really where we are in terms of the threats with radicalisation and deepfakes, for example, but also how our young people can protect themselves when it comes to this as well. So this is a particular area that I think is fantastic for schools and trusts to be focusing on now. Oh, it's me again there.
There we are. Yes, as part of our free offer to schools, we've released this as an entree to it. And one of my points is that this education has got to be progressive. It can't be just parked in the year 9 or 10 curriculum. It's got to start young. And what we're trying to do as well is reflect on thinking skills for the new age of living, learning, and working. Because it's no good just telling young people about what to do. We've got to equip them to think for themselves.
Yeah, and I think with the backdrop of AI, we're already starting to have discussions, aren't we, in education about the lack of critical skills which will be needed, as we know that AI will continue to be a tool or replace. So the more that we can do to get ahead as being experts in AI ourselves and understanding the media literacy, the construction of content and things like that, the better it is, not only for ourselves in our roles and professions, but also to better equip our young people so we can help educate them and not just assume that they're going to know what to do themselves.
Yeah, I think you're getting the drift of where we're coming from. Understanding how the mind works, foundational to good teaching and being a good educator. And so some of the Microlink MicroLearning we're developing for rollout after Christmas with schools that are in our tent. And to be in the tent doesn't cost much. We're working it out to be around £17 a month. What we're going to be offering is a whole series of learning opportunities based on a fantastically accessible online learning platform around topics like creating the neuroinclusive classroom, what the amygdala hijack is, an introduction to how the brain works, something about neurodivergence, building resilience in the age of anxiety, understanding masking, meltdown, burnout, what neuroception is, exploring empathy. This is just a few of these episodic bits of learning. We realize it's impossible sometimes to get the whole school together to learn something and then apply it immediately. By introducing these micro learning events, it means these things will be pulled into a professional development plan. People can concentrate on just these aspects and then learn and how to develop it. That's our plan, and we really hope some of you join in it, because actually, there are so many opportunities that are developing. I got this from social media only last week from one of my colleagues, Carl Ward, and he was looking at what someone in the workplace might do and how AI might help them. Well, just look at these examples. A financial analyst who might have low vision could ask Gemini to explain a chart that appears in Google Sheets. In Excel, a copilot could be used to explain formulas and highlight trends. ChatGPT could take a 50-page report and reformat it into a shorter screen reader friendly paragraph. Ooh, and what do we mean by screen reader? Whoops. A screen reader means that something is, if you like, visible and readable through digital remediation. Now, some of you might not understand what digital remediation means, but hey presto, we happen to have an expert ready. This is the Blue Peter effect. Neil, thank you for waiting so patiently.
You're very welcome, Marius.
Because you're actually more business focused than education focused.
Sure.
Did what I said and what Nick said over the last 40 minutes or so resonate with some of the things you're thinking?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think particularly in terms of helping children within the neuroinclusive classroom. I mean, I think in terms of neurodivergence and helping pupils who maybe are struggling with dyslexia and other cognitive impairments as well. So yeah, totally agree.
Totally. So tell us about digital remediation then. What does it mean and why is it important?
Okay, well, first off, just to say that, remediation is the process of essentially fixing your digital content so that disabled people find it easier to use. So that's pretty much a definition for it.
Find it easy to use. So in other words, there are individuals, say, with mobility problems who might want to try and access information on a website. Yeah.
That's correct. That's right. And I think just to give you a very good example of that, so if, say, for example, you have a motor impairment and you find maybe you've got issues with dexterity, you might use what's called a switch. So that you can actually use on the floor, for example, as a little switch button. It's very, very simple, very basic piece of equipment to use, but it is an assistive technology.
Wow. And then you might have someone who's visually impaired. Yeah.
That's right. That's correct.
Trying to access a document. And if it's not remediated, it makes it really hard to read with a screen reader or something like that.
That's absolutely correct, Marius. So yes, if you are a screen reader user, so particularly if you're blind or you're partially screen content to be read out aloud to the individual using it. But just to make it clear, that if, say, for example, on a website or in a PDF document, if it's not set up correctly, it simply cannot be recognized by the screen reader, and therefore the person using it, so if you're blind or partially sighted, you are not able to actually read that document. So that's why it's so important.
I know. And sometimes something like color contrast. Oh, when you've got stuff on the screen, if you don't use a screen reader, it makes it hard to actually see what's there if you've got low visibility, visual impairment. Yeah.
You're absolutely correct, Marius. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. So it's not just blind people who use screen readers. So when I say blind, I mean cannot see a thing. Obviously, there are gradations of that, but there are also people who are visually impaired or are partially sighted, but they also use a screen reader. So it's worth bearing that in mind.
And this might frighten some schools, but there's a legal precedent about this, isn't there?
That's it, and I think that's the thing, is to be aware that we're in the new year for the webinar itself. We're going to be exploring it's pretty much the legislation that surrounds digital accessibility itself within the context of the web content accessibility guidelines. I won't go into sort of a massive deep dive on that, but essentially the web content accessibility guidelines, they just give you the means to be able to test certain aspects of your website to ensure it can be used by disabled people. And I think also on that note as well is that we'll cover so 3 main areas. So you're going to have the Equality Act 2010. There's also the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations, a bit of a mouthful, that one. We call it PSBAR for short, and that was set up in 2018. And then also there'll also be the European Accessibility Act, and that came out in I think it was June 2025. So essentially that's for companies doing business in the European Union. Now, please don't panic. So in the immortal words of Douglas Adams, do not panic. We will make sure that we provide you with an overview of that, so that it's digestible, it's clear, and it's actionable. You can take it away and use it. But we will also make sure that we provide, as you can see on screen here, links, so that if you want to take it further in your own time, you can do so.
Oh wow! And actually, some people might be worried about it, but actually, if let me just take this example. I started constructing this slide, for example, Neil, and then I just thought, look at the graphics here. Oh, I'm really pleased with that. What wonderful! And then I suddenly thought, hang on, how will a screen reader actually if I turn my PowerPoint into a PDF, which I do all the time, what will a screen reader make of something like this? And actually, baked into the design features of PowerPoint, there's a tool, isn't there?
That's absolutely correct. And you've got a fantastic example here on the screen. So it's of the Microsoft accessibility checker. So on that slide that you showed,
Yes.
you've highlighted the tool that says, okay, check for accessibility, and then that tool, it toddles off, it goes away, and as you can see from that arrow on screen, it points to some of the errors or issues that are found. So in this particular example, it refers to reading order. Now, reading order is one of the most critical aspects for a screen reader user. So just to give a general understanding of this, so on that particular slide, you might want to sort of read left to right, or read top left down to bottom left, and across the page. So it's up to you how you do it, but as long as you maintain consistency, and also that it's in a logical order as well. So one of the things also to be aware of is that if it's not set up correctly and you miss it for whatever reason, sometimes content can get missed in that sequence. So that can actually change the meaning of the information. So that's actually quite crucial. I was trying to think of a particular example, yesterday evening for this presentation was essentially, so if you're a disabled person and you've got a job description, if you're not given, say, for example, and you're a screen reader user, and you're not actually made aware of, for example, the deadline of the job that's being offered, you might miss that deadline. So it's things like that that reading order is quite crucial for, but also just simply that reading order itself, as I'm sure you've probably experienced yourselves when you're reading a book or a document or even just a web page. So typically you start off with like, a headline, sort of maybe H1, for example, and then you might read down to a subtitle, and then maybe a subheading, and then maybe a paragraph of text, and then maybe on down to a sentence. So it's just that logical structure of the information, and as long as that's the same as what is visually represented, so that if you're non-disabled and you're reading on-screen content, that you can do the same for those who are non-visual or those who are blind. So there we go.
Absolutely. And here's another thing. As you might make out on reading order, I have not tagged some of those arrows. Those arrows leading to the melting pot are irrelevant to the success. It helps the visual learner. But of course, if I've tagged these as decorative, as I have done, and I produce a PDF of this presentation, you can feed that PDF into an artificial intelligence system, and it will pull out the key points of my webinar and summarize them without saying, and there's arrows on slide 23. Correct?
That's correct. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Folks, I hope that. Thank you, Neil.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for that. And Neil will be doing a full webinar on digital remediation and what you can do to start that remediation journey within your schools in the new year. I hope you've enjoyed the last 45 minutes or so. Please visit the Microlink Education website for more information on our services and our school offer. There's a link which I'll be sending out. And the only questions we've had are, will we get these slides, please? Will we get these slides, please? Now, in the interests of openness, some of these slides might not be read by a screen reader because I want to get this out fast to you. But if there's a request for the slide deck, I will honor that request. But please, I'm afraid if I remediated it correctly, it might be a delay of a week or so. But I'm going to get these slides out to you straight away with the hyperlinks, with the information. I do hope you'll find it useful. If you happen to be coming to the Test Send show in London on Friday and Saturday this week, 10th and 11th, I'll be there with my colleagues, and it'll be lovely to keep the conversation flowing. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Neil, for your input, and we do look forward to it. And guys, if you've got any comments or observations, do lob them into the chat pane before we finish. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I do hope some of you join us on our journey to build the Neuroinclusive Classroom. We are talking to the SSAT Trust. We are talking to ASCL. We know that there are people out there who really passionately believe that we can transform outcomes for some of our most vulnerable young people in our schools just by putting in access to screen readers, just by making our documents more accessible. And remember, we found this in our school. In working with schools, we've introduced, for example, access to screen readers to some schools, and they've brought the parents in. And often we find conditions like dyslexia run in families. We've been able to help aunties and uncles as well as children to get the most out of society's offers. Thank you so much for listening. Again, thank you, Neil. And,
you're welcome.
We really hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for attending. Oh, and thanks for the thanks that are coming in on the webinar chat. Please don't feel we're being rude, but when we stop the webinar, everyone, including ourselves, is bounced out of it. We'll have a clean recording, which we'll share with you in the next few days. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. And hopefully see you at some future webinars where we'll bring the Neuro-Inclusive Classroom alive and vibrant.